Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh Fullerton.
My name is Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week, you have decided the topic of our podcast. Kind of, although we could do that at some point. No, recently we've run a poll on probably the eternal question that haunts every Doctor Who fan throughout their life or lives is, who's your favourite Doctor? You know, which Doctor is the best? It's a thing we've asked on radiotimes.com a few times over the years, but we hadn't done it in a while, so we thought, why not? In the midst of the Jodie Whittaker era, kind of add her to the list and see what people think. And yeah, we had an amazing response. We had nearly 50,000 votes, which is really cool. And we had some really interesting results. Didn't we, Morgan?
Yes, we did. Well, as you may have seen on radiotimes.com or in many other places that picked up the poll results, David Tennant, he came out on top, narrowly, though, beating Jodie Whittaker into second place. And actually what we've seen is many of the top spots are dominated by new series Doctors, which is something that's provoked a good deal of discussion and debate, I think, among fandom, it's fair to say. A lot of people saying, you know, where's the love for the classic Doctors? Why is the list dominated, why are the top spots dominated by new series Doctors? So Hugh, where is the love for the classic Doctors, and why are the top spots dominated by new series Doctors?
Well, Morgan, no, I do think it's quite interesting. I was interested that people sort of were surprised by that in a way, because you tend to find that when you run a poll, people tend to be quite inclined to think of what they've seen recently and what they've enjoyed recently. And obviously David Tennant's not done the show for 10 years, but relatively speaking, that's recently. Also, a lot of the people who voted in the poll were probably fans of New Who, which is Christopher Eccleston onwards. So they're more inclined to have watched during the tenure of these new Doctors. It may be if they watched the older Doctors, they would have them as their favourites, but the series as it is more likely to appeal to them. That said, I actually thought kind of the opposite to what people said, which is that I was really pleased that a classic Doctor made it into the top 5, which was Tom Baker, obviously. And right after him is William Hartnell, which was, I didn't expect him to rank so highly. I mean, he hasn't played the role since 1966. Well, a little later, I suppose. But yeah, and he beat Christopher Eccleston and Paul McGann, who are both newer Doctors. And obviously, well, all the Doctors below him were newer Doctors. So I feel like the classic series did have a fairly strong showing, actually. It's just, we did a similar James Bond poll a little while ago, and I think Daniel Craig won that, didn't he?
No, Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. Well, that shows me. But I remember Daniel Craig did do quite well. So
yeah,
it does.
He gave Connery a run for his money, certainly.
Yeah. So I think, and everyone was sort of saying, "Oh no, it's got to be Roger Moore." Blah, blah, blah. And I think it is one of these things where the kind of the lure of the more recent is often what kind of makes people go for those things. I mean, what do you think?
Well, no, I mean, this is an online poll, right? So without being too ageist about it, I think, it speaks to the age range of the people who are voting in this poll, that it has been dominated by new series Doctors, as you say. They're likely predominantly going to be people who have started watching with the 2005 relaunch. I mean, possibly not. It is possible, of course, that older viewers who have been watching all the way back since 1963 have seen all of Doctor Who and still think that David Tennant is the best Doctor. We shouldn't just totally dismiss that out of hand. But seeing that the newer Doctors are holding many of the top positions, it does seem to imply a younger voter base. And also, I think, also speaking to the age divide, the fact that Patrick Troughton, for example, was lower down on the ranking, and he's often hailed within Doctor Who fandom as one of the most iconic Doctors. Certainly one of the most sort of influential, and personally speaking, he's one of my favourites. But I think, again, if we're considering the average age of voters on this poll, so much of Troughton's era in particular is lost, and it's not easily accessible to a younger generation who might be watching Doctor Who, classic Doctor Who, at least through DVD and Blu-ray and now BritBox. So his Doctor may have been overlooked simply because of that lack of availability of some of the older stuff. There's the ongoing animations of missing episodes, most recently Fury from the Deep, that will hopefully help highlight his performance and those classic stories to new fans. But the new series stuff is obviously way more accessible, so that may have also swayed the vote somewhat.
Definitely. We should say, by the way, I might just quickly run through the list of, the ranking, because if anyone listening doesn't know, we'll put it in the description of this of this podcast as well. But number one, there was David Tennant, who had 21% of the vote. Number two was Jodie Whittaker, who also had 21% of the vote. David Tennant had about, I don't know, just slightly under 100 more votes than Jodie, so that's why he took the top spot. Very close. Peter Capaldi came third with 18%, so also pretty close. After him, Matt Smith, 16%. After him, in fifth, Tom Baker with 8%. In sixth, William Hartnell with 4%. In seventh, Paul McGann with 3%. Just after him, eighth, Christopher Eccleston, 2%. Just after him, ninth, Jon Pertwee, 2%. And Patrick Troughton at 10 also had 2%. Again, there was about 100 or so votes between those three doctors. So Patrick Troughton, Jon Pertwee, and Christopher Eccleston all pretty close. At 11, Sylvester McCoy had 1% of the votes, as did Colin Baker and Peter Davison, who were 12th and 13th. And I mean, Peter Davison and Colin Baker only had about 8 votes between them, and they had about 100 votes after Sylvester McCoy. So at the bottom half of the table, it is actually quite close. And the ranking really could have gone a few different ways, I think, basically from Paul McGann downwards, because so much of the vote was swallowed up by David Tennant, Jodie Whittaker, and Peter Capaldi, really.
Yeah, and I think, again, it speaks to the age divide, and maybe something of a divide between, classic series fans, if you like, and new series fans, because, as we said, the new series doctors do dominate, and where the classic fans of the classic series did vote, they're probably going to vote for Tom Baker, right? Because, of the classic series, he is arguably the most well-known, the most popular, or maybe Jon Pertwee. They might vote for Jon Pertwee. So I don't think it necessarily speaks to a dislike or even an apathy towards Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy. Plenty of fans love those doctors. Well, no, I think it's just the manner of a poll like this that other doctors will draw away that support and then split the vote somewhat, because, as we said, there's not a lot in it really.
Yeah, I mean, the other way of looking at it as well is that if we ran this and, Tom Baker was unequivocally the best every time anyone ran one of these polls, there's a kind of something a bit depressing about that, because that suggests that the show hasn't been as good as it was, quite a few years ago. And, you kind of want people to at least think while it's on, oh, this is a good version of the show. It's not like, oh, God, I much preferred it in, the 70s. Like, you kind of do feel like, it's kind of good that it's nice for me personally. Like, I really like that Tom Baker and William Hartnell were as high as they are. The thing that was really cheering was it was interesting. David Tennant winning for me wasn't a big surprise, because he's usually the one people cite as the favourite. He's certainly the most crowd pleasing, I think. What did surprise me? Sorry.
No, I should say I think he is a crowd pleaser. I think you're right. He's a very mainstream doctor, and I don't mean that as any kind of slight. But he's young. Yeah, he's good looking. He's a sort of a romantic hero. He's eccentric, but not in any way that is off-putting or alienating. He's quite cool in a sort of, in his suit and sneakers, which was, I remember the sort of the height of 2006 cool. Like the 10th Doctor looked like he could have been the lead singer in an indie band of the time. And I think not only that, but I think people also associate David Tennant with what is arguably the kind of the peak of the show's popularity, at least in the UK. He's the face of what many fans see as a golden era in the recent history of Doctor Who, which I think is why he tends to top a lot of these polls.
He's also like, if you didn't watch Doctor Who anymore, he might be the Doctor that you last really watched. Yeah, I mean, that's, obviously there were high views in the years since, but, it might be that he's kind of the one you think of as, oh yeah, that's when I watched the show. The thing I found interesting actually was not even that Jodie Whittaker coming second was quite interesting, because obviously Jodie, some people really don't like Jodie playing the Doctor in Doctor Who. I think that's, that's true of every Doctor. I would say, Jodie Whittaker's the one who, like, when we write stuff, people kind of say, oh, I really don't like Jodie Whittaker, whatever. And then we have an equal number of people swarming in from the other side saying, no, Jodie's the best Doctor. I really like Jodie. So I was kind of interested to see how that would play out in the poll. And the fact that she's done so well, I think, is partly a lot of people. There wasn't an option to say vote people down or anything. So it's quite a positive expression. People kind of had to just pick their favourite. So it's nice to kind of see that many people do like Jodie as the Doctor. Like, it is a lot of people, even if, like, it may be like all the people who don't like her maybe spread among the other Doctors. I don't know. But it does still sort of show you a kind of clean way people look at her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that. Jodie's Doctor does absolutely have some vocal critics. There's no denying that. But also, as this poll demonstrates, like you say, there is no vote down option. She has a strong support base as well. Yeah. And my sort of observations generally from monitoring social media seem to be that there is a very specific fan base, I think, for Jodie's era, without maybe a great deal of crossover into other parts of fandom. Now, again, it's kind of a sweeping statement because, of course, there are fans who like all of Doctor Who, and there is some crossover. But there does seem to be this very specific fan base for the Jodie Whittaker, Chris Chibnall era of Doctor Who that maybe doesn't have as much interest in the show that came before, which is fine, which is valid. And, you know, part of the push of that whole era has been to bring in a new and a younger audience, and maybe quite a different audience to those which watched Doctor Who before, just as the 2005 relaunch brought a whole new audience to the show who weren't just classic Doctor Who fans. So it definitely feels like there's a little pocket of fandom that is very, very staunch in its support of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor.
Definitely. I mean, she was actually leading the poll when we first ran it at the start, and then she got knocked down to about fourth, I think, under Peter Capaldi and Matt Smith, and then at the end she kind of rose up again to the final result being as close as it is crazy, really. I mean, I will say, I think the thing that surprised me most about this poll, though, wasn't that Jodie did really well, because I thought it was a possibility. It was how well Peter Capaldi did. Because I really like Peter Capaldi in Doctor Who, and I know that he was very much a kind of like, I feel like he was the aesthete's choice, if I'm pronouncing that right, of doctors. Like when he was cast, it was very much like, oh my God, it's like a return. Some people would say, oh, it's like a return to classic Who. This Doctor, I love this direction. But there was definitely a perception at the time that maybe he was a little less popular with like general audiences. Obviously, this was around the time some Doctor Who ratings were starting to, go down a little bit. And there was a real sense that when he left of like, did Peter Capaldi get a fair shake at it? Was he kind of like pushed out? Could he have, had a more popular tenure? It's really nice to see that clearly Peter Capaldi is still really popular. Like he hasn't done it for 3 years, and there wasn't any like. It's different to maybe Jodie Whittaker and David Tennant, where you think maybe with the Jodie vote there's a certain kind of, I don't want to use the word agenda, but there's maybe a kind of campaigning spirit there of like, let's show the people who don't like Jodie how much we like Jodie. And maybe David Tennant is the ultimate of like, oh yeah, David Tennant, it's never been as good as when he was on it. With Peter Capaldi, you feel like him getting 18% of the vote is kind of like, obviously he was the Doctor very recently, but it is kind of a sign of clearly, with a couple of years, I don't know, retrospective, people are kind of thinking, yeah, Peter Capaldi was really great.
I definitely think he's become more popular since he left. Now, how much of that is, again, critics of the current direction of the show looking back and with hindsight going, oh, actually we didn't know how good we had it. Who knows? But I do definitely feel like Capaldi and his era have undergone a bit of a reappraisal recently. Not that he was hugely unpopular. No,
I didn't. I hope it didn't come off that I was saying that at all. It's just that like, no. I think that I would, to be honest, I would have expected probably Matt Smith and maybe Tom Baker to be ahead of Peter Capaldi in a kind of fan vote. And the fact that he did come so high I didn't really see much noise around people trying to aim for that or anything. Kind of makes you feel like quite, that's quite nice.
Yeah, no, I think Capaldi fans have really come out in force after he left the show, and his supporters have become more vocal. I think a big jumping off point for that was there was an article that was published, I think quite a while ago now, but it suggested that Peter Capaldi's take on the Doctor was not universally loved, I believe is the quote.
Yes.
And it sparked off this hashtag, the universe loves Peter Capaldi. And I think possibly because there is a misunderstanding or misapprehension among some people that his take wasn't popular. Again, sort of like you're saying about the Jodie Whittaker thing, when Doctor Who fans who love a particular Doctor feel like that Doctor is being criticised or threatened, they then sort of double down and say, we'll show you just how much we love this Doctor. And I feel like there's been a real, as I say, a real resurgence in kind of Capaldi support over the past few years. And I think also, his era was quite tumultuous in some ways. His Doctor went through quite a drastic evolution over his years in the role, more so than arguably in some of his predecessors. And each of his series, I would say, has a very distinct and different feel, more so than the Matt Smith era. And at the time, I think, certain fans liked certain aspects of his era and other fans disliked those aspects and liked other aspects. But I think now in retrospect, you can see the whole thing in context. And one thing that does stand out is just the strength of his performance. So whether he's playing that sort of grouchy, darker Doctor of Series 8 or the kind of guitar-playing hippie wizard of Series 9 or that kind of more classic Doctor of Series 10, he's always very good. And I feel like, now kind of you can step back from the Peter Capaldi era and go, well, no matter what you think of his era as a whole, he was a fantastic Doctor and really, really great on the show.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that it's really cheering to kind of see, I mean, it's not been very long since he left. It's been, less than 3 years, but it's kind of cheering to see like the popularity's there. I mean, he beat Matt Smith, and I would have, I mean, maybe this is my prejudice, but I would have kind of assumed, I would have thought of Matt Smith as a kind of quote unquote more popular Doctor in my head, because, you know, you kind of have that sense of the show was very big. You know, this was the 50th anniversary special. You know, this was, you know, his first episode in 2010 just felt so huge at the time. You know, it all felt so exciting and big. And I mean, maybe that's just because I was younger, but you know, I mean, I don't know if you agree. I would have assumed. I mean, he was pretty close behind Peter Capaldi, to be fair. But I would have assumed he'd be higher. And it's really interesting to see that while he does still have these fans, that, you know, Peter Capaldi can get a higher vote share, like, easily.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, you know, speaking personally, Matt is one of my favorite Doctors, and also you're right. He like David Tennant, he was at the helm of the show when it was arguably at its sort of popular peak, at least in terms of, you know, rating in the UK. I think maybe, as with, you know, I think with Peter Capaldi, there's beating Matt Smith, I think there's a sense of voting for the underdog a little bit. I think maybe fans who love both Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi were more likely to vote for Peter Capaldi because they suspected he wouldn't beat Matt Smith, if that makes sense. And so enough people, and again, because there have maybe been some unfair criticisms of the Peter Capaldi era in sort of recent history, they went, no, this is an opportunity to show how much we love Peter Capaldi. It's kind of a given that we love Matt Smith. You know, we've had enough praise for Matt Smith. So maybe, you know, it's an opportunity to shine a light on those Doctors that we really love that don't always get the credit. And I think similarly, like, I was surprised to see Paul McGann in this list above Christopher Eccleston, who, and again, I think maybe there's a sense there that Paul McGann was a little bit hard done by as a Doctor. He was hard done by, at least on, you know, on TV. He didn't really get the shot he deserved. And fans are voting for him, not just because they love Paul McGann, because they do, and I do. Again, I feel like I'm saying this a lot, but he is one of my favourites, Paul McGann. But I think also they're voting for him because there's a sense that he is an underdog Doctor. It's like, no one else is going to vote for Paul McGann, so I'll vote for him. And actually, a lot of people had that thought, and then that saw him rocketing up the rankings.
I mean, possibly similar with William Hartnell, who, you know, beat Christopher Eccleston and Paul McGann, which, you know, is really cool. And I feel like that's maybe a similar thing of people thinking, who's going to pick William Hartnell? I really like William Hartnell. But also maybe could be a response to things like in the most recent series. I remember people were saying, you know, has William Hartnell been disrespected by these revelations of Timeless Children? So maybe people were like, now's my time to give William Hartnell the boost he really needs up in heaven, you know?
No, I definitely think that. I definitely think that plays into it. I think William Hartnell's great, and I think he, you know, deserves his votes on merit, absolutely. But I do think that some of this may be a response to the Timeless Child reveal, because as you said, some saw that as a threat to or dismissal of William Hartnell's positioning as the first Doctor, as the guy who started it all off. And I think that maybe has brought the Hartnell fans out in force here. They want to show their support for, again, what they may see as a kind of a perceived criticism of William Hartnell's Doctor, whether or not it was intended as such.
Yeah. Another thing that surprised me, actually, we mentioned Christopher Eccleston there. I should say, I was surprised Christopher Eccleston wasn't higher in the list. Partly because obviously there's been these announcements that he's going to reprise the role for the first time since he left the series in this new Big Finish series. And there was such an outpouring of, like, joy when that was announced, and people saying, finally, we're going to get the Ninth Doctor era we deserve. You know, Christopher Eccleston's, you know, kind of making peace with the show. This is so great. Ninth Doctor's my favourite. I always wanted to see more. You know, because you see so much of that, I was thinking, oh, he might do quite well. You know, in the kind of way we've talked about with William Hartnell maybe doing better because of, you know, recent things. I thought maybe people are going to vote for him. He actually didn't score very highly. Like, I mean, he did pretty well, but I do feel like I was a little bit surprised that he didn't do better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think maybe this poll landed at just the wrong time for Christopher Eccleston's Doctor, in the sense that well, I'm not saying the excitement around him returning to the role for Big Finish has dissipated, you know, far from it, but we've kind of, you know, we're over the initial wave of, you know, the burst of excitement. Fans have got used to the idea that he's coming back. Still very exciting. And we're not yet at the point where we've heard him return to the role, and that's created a renewed appreciation for the Ninth Doctor, as I'm sure it will, just as Paul McGann's Big Finish adventures have seen a kind of, you know, renewed appreciation and enthusiasm for the Eighth Doctor. So Christopher Eccleston currently is still just that Doctor that we don't have that much of. And so maybe that could have, you know, negatively impacted him. I think definitely, you know, that, and we shouldn't forget that 2005 is 15 years ago, and there'll be Doctor Who fans that have come to the show post Eccleston. So I think definitely there'll be fans discovering him maybe for the first time, or rediscovering his Doctor and seeing his new Doctor, or seeing his Doctor in a new light rather, when we get those Big Finish adventures. I think, maybe it just fell slightly awkwardly, this poll for the Ninth Doctor.
As well, the thing you've got to think about is this is 50,000 people. There's millions of people who live in the UK alone who watch or have watched Doctor Who. If you think about, I'm sure this may not be representative of the population as a whole, because these sort of things tend to be a bit self-selecting of who would be interested in voting Doctor Who poll. But even if you did extend this out to like the whole population, that he got just over 1,000 votes. That is suddenly turns into like hundreds of thousands, of people who think Christopher Eccleston's the best Doctor. So if you are listening to this thinking, oh, but I know loads of people who love X Doctor, why didn't they do better? It's like, you probably do, and they do exist. It's just maybe there's more people separate from your people who like another Doctor more. I know that sounds like a bit obvious, but I just think it's easy to forget sometimes. If everyone thinks a thing, and then you sort of see something that goes against that, you think, how is that possible? But it's just, I guess it's just the way these things work.
Yeah, and also one of the great things about Doctor Who and having all the different Doctors is that every Doctor is someone's favourite. So you may have, everyone has their own sort of personal ranking of Doctors, but as you're saying, you could meet someone whose ranking is the complete opposite of that. That's the wonderful world of Doctor Who fandom. Everyone has very different opinions, this poll reflects, it reflects the people that voted, but there's bound to be someone out there for whom Peter Davison, who came bottom of this poll, he's their favourite Doctor. I mean, Stephen Moffat, for example, is I think said that Peter Davison he thinks is the finest actor to ever play the role. This poll purely reflects the opinions of those who took the time to vote in it. But of course, there are no truly unpopular Doctors, and every Doctor is someone's favourite or a whole bunch of fans' favourites.
Definitely, and also, if we've run this poll in the past, and I think I was actually just trying to check. I haven't got it right here, but I do think that it's pretty clear that I think you're going to have a different result every single time. Like we did in 2015, we did a Who's the Best Doctor of the Modern Era, and we got a completely different ranking to the one we got this time. And if you extend that out, another year we could do this, and maybe Christopher Eccleston's played the role again more recently, he suddenly shoots up. Maybe people aren't as thinking about William Hartnell in the way that they are this year. He suddenly goes down, but maybe Peter Davison does something amazing and then he pops up again. Maybe we run this right after Tom Baker does another Charlotte-esque surprise appearance, and then he's right at the top. Maybe after this poll, everyone will say, "This is an outrage. Tom Baker didn't win the last one this time. I'm gonna right this wrong."
No, absolutely. It's not just obviously these polls differ on who votes in them, but also there's so many mitigating factors as well. In the sense that if we'd run this poll straight after Time Crash, there's no way that Peter Davison I think would have been way higher. If we had run this poll prior to the Timeless Children, I think possibly William Hartnell may have been a few positions lower. So it absolutely, it depends on who's voting, but it also depends on when these polls fall as well.
Definitely. I also feel like if we'd done it after Time Crash, Jodie Whittaker, Peter Capaldi and Matt Smith might not have scored such a big proportion of the vote, given that they weren't in the series. But
fans might just taken a punt. Go like I like the idea of Peter Capaldi as the Doctor. That sounds good. I'll give him my vote.
Chris Marshall gets my vote. So I guess kind of the final question I have to say, the poll results kind of have gone, they've gone around. We, lots of people have written about them and kind of talked about whether they think it's the right result or not. What do you think? Do you think David Tennant is the best Doctor?
That is tough. I mean, because there's personal subjective opinions on this, which again, every Doctor Who fan has their opinions, and then there's kind of trying to step back and take an objective look at it. Now, is David Tennant my personal favourite Doctor? No, and again, that's not an insight. I think he's brilliant. He's just not personally my number one favourite. Do I understand why he wins why he won this poll and why he wins a lot of these polls? Yes, I absolutely do. For all the reasons I stated previously, I think he's not only the face of the show at one of its most popular peaks, similar to Tom Baker, who was sort of the face of the show when it was at its creative and popular peak in the 1970s for the classic series. I think not only that, but I think David Tennant is a very, very accessible Doctor. I think that's what's important. I think he was very clearly, readily embraced by the general public, because he's maybe not eccentric in a way that is. I think certain Doctor Who fans loved some of the risks that were taken in the early Peter Capaldi era, where the Doctor is slightly less amiable initially, and you kind of have to get to know him, and there's that moral debate over whether or not he's a good man and all that kind of stuff. And I think fans kind of love that moral ambiguity, but actually, if you're aiming for like real mainstream success, you want the Doctor to be kind of big and broad and accessible and likable. I think still with an element of mystery to him, but I think that's what David Tennant did really well. He was sort of charming and likable and funny. He's still an undercurrent there, of course, as the Doctor always has, of darkness and mystery. But I think he's a very sort of mainstream Doctor without that being any kind of insult or slight. What do you think, Hugh?
I was thinking about this quite a bit. I have this thing where there's a sort of thing people talk about where every time you walk into a room and forget why you went in the room, it's because your brain kind of resets when you walk into a different room. And I always feel a little bit like that with Doctor Who, in that when I kind of am watching a particular Doctor, I'm like, oh yeah, it's the Doctor, there's the Doctor. And when I watch a different episode, different Doctor, I'm like, oh, it's the Doctor, there's the Doctor. Like, my brain kind of doesn't necessarily think, oh no, they're not right. Do you know what I mean? Like, it kind of just does that switch. I will say, like, the first Doctor I ever saw on TV was Jon Pertwee, randomly, on reruns. I used to watch reruns when I was a kid. And then obviously, when the series came back with Christopher Eccleston and stuff that came with that, David Tennant did kind of feel like people say, like, my Doctor when I was watching it at the time. I think possibly I slightly preferred Matt Smith later, but it's one of those things where, like, it's kind of comforting to kind of return to David Tennant. And again, it sounds like we're slagging him off. Like, oh, he's like we're settling for David Tennant, but we're not. It's more that, like, he was definitely like a version of the Doctor that I think by dint of being so good became so popular that it's kind of hard to admit liking him in a way, because it feels quite basic.
It does feel like the basic. That's the word I was thinking. It feels like the basic choice. He's a populist. He's both a popular and a populist Doctor. I think he was designed as well to be populist, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think I've said this before, but I think Doctor Who needed Christopher Eccleston's darker, slightly more difficult Doctor, actually, when it first came back, only because Doctor Who had arguably become a bit of a joke in the eyes of the public while it was off screen. It was all rubber monsters and wobbly sets and so on. So you needed an actor of that caliber to come in and give it something a little bit different, a little bit more serious. I think you needed him in the shaved head with the leather jacket. But then with that take on it having totally restored the show's credibility and it becoming this enormous success, I think it was perfect that you then have David Tennant come in as he's the perfect Doctor to kind of ride the coattails, the long brown coattails of that success, because he's big and he's mainstream and he's populist, so I think that was perfect for the era in which he was playing the role, and like it sounds like a bad thing, but I don't think we mean it when we say it, that he is kind of a populist Doctor. He's kind of comfort food Doctor. But only because he was so good, right?
Yeah, he was just so effortlessly good at it and so charming.
Effortlessly good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's impossible not to like him. So it feels like less of an achievement if you like him, if that makes a weird sort of sense. But
it's one of those things where frequently in film and television, the things that seem effortless very much are not.
Oh yeah.
So I think there was a lot of work that went in, from David Tennant, putting in work into his performance, but also from Russell T Davies into the writing, every single aspect of that, creative output at the time. There's a lot of work that went into making the 10th Doctor so popular. But now, because he is so popular, it feels like, well, yeah, of course he's popular, duh, oh, the 10th Doctor one, duh. But actually, I think there's as much work probably that goes into make it, to crafting a Doctor who is, charming and funny and a romantic hero. That's as valid and requires as much hard work as it does to craft a Doctor who is mysterious and dark and a bit more morally ambiguous. Arguably, it's harder actually to make the more straightforward Doctor interesting. you know, as an actor, I imagine, you know, it's more fun to play a character who is darker and morally ambiguous and mysterious than it is to play someone who's more of a straightforward hero, which David Tennant's Doctor arguably is compared to some of the other incarnations. So actually, the fact that this kind of more straightforward, straight shooting Doctor is the one that fans are consistently voting as their favorite, or one of their favorites. Again, that speaks to the fact that David Tennant and the whole team just did a really good job in crafting that character of the 10th Doctor.
Yeah, and as much as we say, oh, he's a more recent Doctor, you got to think, you know, he last played the role properly 10 years ago. He hasn't been on this. Yeah. That is any other TV show would be saying that was a long time ago. With Doctor Who, you're like, oh, just barely any time.
Yeah.
But, you know, like that kind of says something about the fact that there's been, you know, 3 Doctors since he left. Yes, I got confused because of all the extra Doctors. But there's been 3 Doctors since he left, and he is still the most popular. And, you know, the fact Jodie Whittaker can take a lot of pride, I think, in the fact that she came second after a Doctor who was so popular when the show was at such a peak creatively. And yeah, to be honest, though, I feel like, and this is very like, I love all my children equally, I feel like any Doctor could have topped this poll. And, you know, some would be more expected than others, but I don't think any would be more deserved than any others, if you get what I mean. Like, I would have been surprised if, say, Patrick Troughton won the whole thing, just because, you know, you feel like people are going to vote for a more modern Doctor. But I would think, you know, I can see why. Do you know what I mean? I can see why you think he was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's some results here that maybe and could have been more surprising than others. But the great thing about Puzzle is there's no wrong answer. You know what I mean? Like any of these Doctors could have been voted number 1, and for the reasons we've already outlined, that's totally valid. They're all sort of valid interpretations of the character, and they all have their very specific pockets of fandom that love that Doctor in particular. So you're right. As we've said, given a different set of circumstances, a different set of voters, any Doctor could have topped this poll and would have deserved the top spot.
Yeah, because we love them all equally.
We do, despite running divisive polls that spark debate. We do, honestly, I like all of them. I do like all of them.
But what do you think, people listening at home? Did we get the right result on this poll? Is David Tennant your favourite Doctor, with Jodie Whittaker a close second? Or do you think Peter Davison was absolutely robbed? Please do let us know in the comments. Give us your own ranking if you want. I've seen some people doing that on social media in response to the poll. It's always really interesting to see how different people do this. And yeah, let us know what you think about the winners, and who you think could have done better, and why you think the people who did well and maybe didn't do well did. It's always interesting to hear people's opinions. We should say we're not data experts or anything. A lot of our speculation here is very much just that, speculation. So we don't actually know why more people vote for David Tennant or Jodie Whittaker than for Colin Baker. That's just us kind of making some educated guesses. So there could be more to it than we know. But yeah, thanks for listening. You can read more about the poll on radiotimes.com. Also, lots of other fun Doctor Who news stories and features, including some stuff coming up. And yeah, I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffrey.
And next week, join us as we rank every single Dalek character who's ever appeared on the show, starting with Dalek Khan, because I think that's alphabetical. I was actually going to suggest that they vote for who out of us is their favourite podcast host. It's just a poll of 2, and well, no, because Helen did it the other week. She'll be like Paul McGann. She'll sweep in and take the whole thing. No. Helen, the one-off host, will come in and absolutely smash both of us. That's what'll happen. Well, until that happens and it causes an ignominious rift between us and ends the podcast forever, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.